6 things about Gloomhaven that I do not like. And please don't hurt me. Okay, so here's the thing. I love Gloomhaven. My channel, it has a ton of Gloomhaven content. So these are just some things that I think are a little bit unbalanced. Maybe they need some tweaks, etc. I still love the game. So yeah, in the comments, don't hurt me too bad. But do let me know what house rules you employ to make your experience better. This, list is going to be based upon rules as written, but I'm always curious as to how people change the game to make sure that it fits, how they're playing. And then also this video, it is not going to cover and name things like the setup time. And I know the setup time is a big gripe about Gloomhaven, but to me, a game of Gloomhaven size, how epic it is, how many components are in there, the sheer amount of content, you've got to accept some setup time. And there are ways you can make it easier too, but you've got to accept some of that. So this list is not going to be about that. It's going to be more about more interesting stuff, about how the game actually works. Okay, let's get started with number 6. Number 6. Losing cards to mitigate damage. And I know exactly why this mechanic was put in place. I mean, you sit down for a 3-hour session, 15 minutes in you get hit by a couple unlucky crits. Without a system like this, you're there laying on the ground, bleeding out, and you've still got the rest of the session and you just end up sitting there annoying your friends, eating Doritos, and just generally being a pest because you're pissed off that you got knocked out right away in the beginning and your night is essentially ruined. Now, the problem with this mechanic as it is that it unbalances some things in the game. And I'll talk more about that later because I don't want to spoiler a later point. But part of it is that it changes the balance in scenarios. Like especially, think of a scenario, it's much shorter. Cards can be used to mitigate damage a lot easier, and it can trivialize some things. What I think should have been done is you could, lose a card to mitigate damage equal to your level or something similar to that. Or there should have been some sort of revive mechanic, and it should have been fairly difficult to pull off, and the person could come back at reduced hit points or something like that. Something to keep people in the game and give them a chance to come back, but not something that, can unbalance things. And I think if we had a revive mechanic or something similar to that, that would add another layer of strategy into the game. Number 5, the difficulty curve. The problem with Gloomhaven is that it starts off too hard and it's a little too punishing for new players, especially if you're not familiar with board games and complex board games where you're managing powers and stuff. Starts off way too hard, and then it gets way too easy, especially when you're starting out at way higher prosperity levels and you're at level, prosperity 7. Your guy starts at 7. He's got more perks than you know what to do with. You've got access to all these powerful items. And so the problem is, as you get better at the game, it also gets easier. And at some point, it becomes quite easy. Now, there's a handful of scenarios out there that are hard regardless. I'm going to put a link up here to, my hardest scenarios in Gloomhaven. Make sure you go check that out. But essentially, the difficulty curve just doesn't make sense. I think there's, a multitude of solutions to this. One is that, you can never start higher than a certain level, regardless of your prosperity, or you start your characters at prosperity, -4 or -5 or something like that. So as you move up through prosperity, you're always starting at level 1 until you get up to like really high. If you were at prosperity 7, you could start out at level 3 character or something like that. And I think this makes it a lot more fun because to me, it's fun leveling up a character. I mean, it feels a bit odd to just start at level 7 or level 8, especially when you've played that much because you're so good at the game by that time. At number 4, we have an oldie but a goodie. Rolling modifiers on disadvantage or advantage. I mean, the most commonly misunderstood rule, even though it's not super complicated, and I've messed it up more times than I can count too, just because it's so counterintuitive. It's almost like your brain is just like, that can't be how it works. Out there, you'll see more threads than anybody can count about, how it works and all the different house rules. So I think, in Jaws of the Lion, rolling modifiers were just, they were taken completely out. I would agree with that strategy. At number 3, we have personal quests. And personal quests, they're just a bit all over the place. Like, you could literally get a personal quest early on that's impossible to fulfill. And then, you level the guy up, the class, and you're stuck at level 9. You're just plodding along at level 9. And I think maybe for some people that's okay. But I think for most, you want to move on to that next cool class. And then some of the personal quest goals, they're just not very fun. Like, they're actually not fun. And so you're kind of like, all right, I guess I'll slog through this personal quest because I really want to unlock the next cool thing. I think there should have been a little bit more consistency. To me, I would have just preferred, like a level up. You level them up to 9. You play at level 9 for a little bit because you want to experience those level 9 cards, right? You want to experience that feeling of being overpowered, but it tends to get a little bit boring after a while. So let's say you play, 3 or 4 scenarios at level 9, then you retire. It would make it a lot simpler and a lot more consistent. At number 2, we have execute abilities. These just aren't fun. They're unbalanced and they just aren't a good part of the game. They're one of my least favorite parts. That's why they're at number 2, I guess. Because they just are unbalanced. And then, they don't work in boss fights. And also, don't forget, they don't work in named monster fights either, right? Check out my video here, 6 obscure rules. It'll explain in more detail. So they don't work against bosses, but that's a bad way of balancing them. And I don't mean to be harsh here, but it's just the balance that they don't work well in boss fights is not a fun way of balancing the power the rest of the time. I just think they're way too overpowered. And, you've got these really cool monsters and they're just like, bye. And there's not enough drawbacks to them. I think they're going to fix this in Frosthaven. They need to be tied more to skill, more conditional. They have to be a lost card, in my opinion, unless they're, ultra conditional and really hard to pull off. And yeah, that's why they're at number 2. They're not great for the game. Before we get to number 1, I hope you're liking the video. If you are, please go ahead, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. It's the little bell so that when I publish new content, you're notified. And just briefly, I'm partnered with Noble Knight Games. They have the largest selection of games in the world. They've got board games, they've got card games, they've got tabletop role-playing games, they've got all that cool stuff from your childhood that you haven't seen in a long time. I mean, their selection is unbelievable. The warehouse that they're running is just massive. Please go ahead and check out the link in the description. If you buy something through that link, I make a small commission, and I really need your support to keep this channel going and to put out great content. Okay, let's get to number 1. At number 1, we have boss fights. And I'm sorry, Isaac, but the boss fights are the worst part of this game. In my entire campaign with my friends, we never lost once in a boss fight. Couple different reasons. One, most of the time there was a simple strategy. The majority of the time you could just roll in and focus. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said throwing away cards unbalances the game. And it really unbalances the boss fights the way they're laid out and makes them super easy. Even the last boss was super easy because of this. You just roll in and you focus on the boss. You throw some cards away to prevent damage. And you just, ultra laser focus, ignoring everything else, attacking the boss. And even with huge hit point pools, I mean, you can do ridiculous amounts of damage. And even the final boss, it was so simple. And so the boss fights were really underwhelming. I also thought they were pretty gimmicky in some ways, and the gimmicks didn't really work. And please don't destroy me in the comments. I do love Gloomhaven. This is just, it was the worst part of the game for me. It actually makes me a little sad talking about it, because I would have all this anticipation when I would see a boss fight coming up, because they're fairly rare. And then I would be completely let down by said boss fight, and it would just leave a bit of a dirty taste in my mouth. Bad taste in my mouth, I think is the correct saying. And it wasn't that fun. And also, they're immune to most conditions. And so a lot of classes, you know, they're using stun and immobilize and wound and stuff like that. And all of that is taken away for the sake of balance, I guess. But I think there just needed to be a simple system where, you know, there was a chance you could stun a boss, right? Maybe there's a 4-card deck with, you know, 3 nulls and 1 success, and you shuffle it every time and you pick one of those cards, and so you have a 25% chance of afflicting a boss with a status condition. This at least would allow you to, you know, use some of those things, and it would have some risk and reward attached to it. And also, a game like Remnant of the Ashes, it has great boss fights. This is a video game I'm talking about, by the way. There's always there's a lot of ads, and they're stopping you from being able to focus on the boss. There's periods in time where you've got to take care of the ads or you will die. That philosophy hopefully is going to be implemented, or something similar to it, because if you have to do that, it makes the boss fight a lot more engaging. You've got to take care of the ads first and then deal with the boss. If you can just ignore the ads, it's almost pointless. So between those two things, I think, you know, it would fix a lot of the issues. But, you know, as it stands right now, the bosses in Gloomhaven are the most underwhelming part for me. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate each and every one of you, and have a great day.